Unfortunately, yesterday, the second half of the class, my microphone popped out. Didn't notice, so we're missing in the recording all of 28 and some of 27. So we always do like a recap of what we did the day before, but today I'm going to do a little bit more just for our viewers. So yesterday we learned chapter 20, the end of chapter 26, 27, and 28. And those three chapters, as we discussed, help us deal with things that cause us stress and anxiety and worry. Again, not mental health, not mental illness, chas v'shalom, but someone who just, runs into things that bother them and worry them, like normal people are. And it's important to get rid of those thoughts that worry us so that we can serve Hashem with joy. And that way we can win our Yetzer Hara by being happy about what we're doing, because if we're not, it keeps us down. And essentially, the Alter Rebbe identified 4 different things that can cause a person worry. And to each of these 4 things, he gave a solution. Chapter 26, the first problem, the first thing that causes a person stress is things not going right in his life. And there the Alter Rebbe said to remember that if it comes from Hashem, it is good. It feels painful to us. It doesn't change the fact that if it's from Hashem, it is good. And if we should have faith that if Hashem is doing it, it must be good. And then that faith takes care of the stress a little bit, because we trust that Hashem is doing it only for good. We know that Hashem only does it for good. The second thing we say that it causes a person to feel stressed is a person feels like he's a failure because he did so many sins in the past. So said the Alter Rebbe, if that thought pops into your head, then that thought is from the Yetzer Hara. It's from the animal soul. Because thinking about the past and thinking about your past sins as bad is reserved for when I'm doing teshuvah. When I'm doing teshuvah, it doesn't pop into my head. I have to make a calculation about how I'm doing to try to fix it. But if it pops into my head, it's just my animal soul trying to make me feel like a loser and trying to make me, you're anyway doing sin, might as well do more sin. So what's the solution when that kind of thought pops into your head? You have to tell yourself, you're right, those are very bad actions, but now is not the time to think about it. When it's time to think about it, we're going to think about it and do teshuvah. But for now, I have to continue doing what I'm doing. Right? That's what we talked about. Remember? Yes? And then in 27, the Alter Rebbe addressed someone who feels stressed out because he feels stressed out by the fact that he always has thoughts that he wants to do sin. Even if he doesn't actually do sin, he just feels like he's failing because, I'm going to open the door for Yehuda. He feels like he's failing because he constantly wants to do sin. Said the Alter Rebbe, the fact that you want to do sin, yeah, I can push that. The Alter Rebbe explained the fact that you want to do sin doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a normal person. A tzaddik gets to the point where he doesn't want to do sin. But a normal person does want to do sin. And the mitzvah is to control yourself. Because it's a mitzvah, you should be happy every single time you have a desire for sin and you control yourself, you fulfill a mitzvah, and you bring Hashem a lot of joy in that you controlled yourself even though you have a desire for sin. But a person shouldn't, chas v'shalom, feel sad that he has desires for sin. That just means he's a normal person. And as a normal person, he has an opportunity to do these mitzvahs of controlling himself. That was chapter 27. Then in chapter 28, said the Alter Rebbe that even if a person has these thoughts in the middle of prayer, or middle of learning, he has thoughts of sin, that he wants to do a sin in the middle of his prayer. And he thinks, if I want to do sin in the middle of prayer, it means my prayer is not so good. And if he feels sad about the fact that his prayer isn't perfect, says the Alter Rebbe, there's nothing wrong with your prayer if you want to do sin in the middle of your prayer. Because your prayer comes from your godly soul, which is doing a fantastic job praying, and your desire for sin comes from your animal soul. And the fact that your animal soul wants to do sin doesn't mean that your godly soul isn't praying properly. It is. And moreover, because your prayer is going so well, therefore the animal soul is trying even harder to distract you. So the fact that a desire or a want for sin pops into your mind in the middle of prayer doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You're normal. You want to do sin. And you're controlling yourself. It doesn't mean your prayer is bad. Your prayer is actually going so well. And it's going so well that your animal soul is trying to distract you. So what's the solution? What was the solution, remember? What? Not to push it away, but to, sorry? Ignore it. And because once you start to fight with it, then it makes it worse. You just completely ignore it. Put all of your attention, all of your focus into the words you're saying in prayer. It doesn't say this, but I'm suggesting. Point to the words, look at the words, say the word more loudly. The more of yourself you put into those words, the more of your intention you put into the words of prayer, the more you'll ignore the desire for sin. And in your mind, you can even think, talking to Hashem in your mind, please, can you help me get rid of this thought? I'm trying to focus on praying to you. So this is the Alter Rebbe in chapter 26, 27, 28, dealing with all the things that can cause you stress and how to get rid of them. Clear? Remember all of this? Okay. Now comes the Alter Rebbe in chapter 29 and 30 and discusses another issue. So the problem with all of the stresses that we just talked about, all the things that are bothering you in chapter 26, 27, 28, being bothered by my life not going well, or bothered by the thoughts of sin, or all that stuff. The problem is, like we said in the beginning of chapter 26, is that it makes you feel lazy, down, and heavy. And in order to fight your Yetzer Hara, you've got to be light on your feet. You've got to be quick to move. You've got to be happy about what you're doing, right? That's what we talked about. But there's another thing that can cause a person to feel lazy and heavy. And it's the opposite of this. All the things we talked about now, what's making you feel heavy and lazy, what's making you feel not interested is the things that are bothering you. Right? Those are making you feel like, oh, I'm a loser anyway. Oh, my life is so horrible. Right? And that's what's making you feel lazy and not wanting to fight your Yetzer Hara with joy and excitement. But there's another thing which is exactly the opposite that will cause you to feel lazy and down. You know what that is? A feeling of let's say, satisfaction. What that means? It means a person feels like, I'm fine. I don't have to do anymore. I'm a good Jew. I do what I'm supposed to. So leave me alone. I have to work hard to fight Hashem, to serve Hashem more. I'm fine. I do my minyan. I do my learning every day. I give my charity. I don't talk Lashon Hara. Overall, I'm a good guy. And that's what causes him to be lazy. So even though he's doing everything right, remember we mentioned way back in chapter 15 that for a Beinoni, it's not good enough just to do everything right. The point of a Beinoni is to fight, right? He's got to put some effort in. Remember this? And we talked about somebody who's a technical Beinoni, someone who by nature isn't interested in sin. So he does everything the Shulchan Aruch says, he does everything the Code of Jewish Law says, he does everything right. But is he fighting to serve Hashem? No. And the point of a Beinoni is to fight to serve Hashem. So even that guy has to push his limits, learn a little more than he's comfortable, give a little more charity than he's comfortable, right? Push himself a little bit, because that's the point of the Beinoni, is to fight and to push himself in the service of Hashem. Yeah? Right, so again, how the tzaddik gets higher and higher levels, I don't really know because I'm not a tzaddik, but there are levels that the tzaddik climbs in which he works hard to serve Hashem. It's not the same as a Beinoni, but he has another type of service. But he doesn't really talk about it so much here because this is the book for regular people, not for tzaddik. Meaning he was fighting to become a tzaddik. It's possible, but even once he becomes a tzaddik, he has other things he has to do. What they are, I don't really know because it's not really... Remember we talked about there's different levels of tzaddik? So maybe he has to fight to try to get to a higher level, right? But for the Beinoni, he has to put up a fight with his animal soul because his animal soul wants... If you go from Russia to tzaddik, do you have to go through Beinoni first? I think so. He mentioned in chapter 13 that if a person really works at being a Beinoni, then Hashem might grant him a reward and make him into a tzaddik. So maybe that's what it is. Right? But that's not what you're hoping for. It's not what you're fighting for in your life. What you're fighting for is to be a Beinoni who's in control of himself. Right? But here we're saying, if you become a Beinoni, if you go from a Beinoni to a tzaddik, it changes the way he feels about Hashem. I don't know if it changes what he does, because what he does is the same. He follows what the Torah says to do. Even the Beinoni follows what the Torah says to do. It changes how he feels about it. Right? Level of Gan Eden? Okay, that's going to be talked about in later chapters. I don't know if we'll be able to get there, but there is a bit different. Yeah, it's different. Because this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but we'll just talk about it now because I don't think we're going to get to it in our learning because it's a little too far in the Tanya. But basically, Gan Eden is when a person enjoys the godliness of the mitzvah that he did. Right? Every mitzvah is a godly act, but when you're in this physical world, you don't really appreciate that. You don't really feel it. You don't really understand it. The Torah says it's a godly act, so you do it. Right? So depending on what level of feelings you have for Hashem, when you do that mitzvah in this world, that's the kind of Gan Eden you have. It's basically 3 levels. And the tzaddik is at the highest level. So maybe it does change the Gan Eden based on what kind of feelings you have when you do that mitzvah. Right? Okay, but here we're talking about something else. Here we're talking about someone who's feeling lazy because he thinks he's fine. I'm a good guy. Leave me alone. Right? So this person is not suffering from worry. It's actually the opposite. He's suffering from, I don't want to say arrogance, because he's not necessarily egotistical, but he's suffering from a problem that just, the Alter Rebbe calls tumtum halev, which means a blocked heart. He's unmotivated. He's not unmotivated because he's not doing anything right. He's unmotivated because he feels like he's fine. Leave me alone, I'm a good guy. Especially if I'm compared to other guys. I see other people doing all kinds of terrible things. I'm fine, leave me alone. I have to start working harder to serve Hashem, I'm fine. You follow? So how does he deal with that? Because it's also a problem. A person has to be light in his feet, he has to be enthusiastic, he has to want to do more, he has to put up a fight and try harder and harder. And just to say, I'm fine, leave me alone, not good enough. So how does he deal with that? So it says the Alter Rebbe like this. The problem here is, there is a kind of arrogance. I feel okay, right? And any statement that starts with I is from the godly soul or animal soul. Animal soul. It's klipa. I'm fine, leave me alone. So he has to deal with that arrogance. He has to get rid of that arrogance, that sense of, I'm a good guy. You know that feeling of like, you feel like good about yourself, like, oh, check me out, I'm a good guy, I do everything right, I'm fine. Look, all those guys, they need to do teshuvah, I'm good. Right? That's an arrogant feeling. That's not the godly soul's feeling, that's the animal soul's feeling. How does he deal with that? So before I tell you what the Alter Rebbe says to deal with arrogance, I want to explain something to the following. You know how sometimes a kid, when they're upset or something like that, and they do this shrugging of the shoulders thing, and you ask them what's wrong, and they tell you, You know that thing? Right? What are they doing when they do that? What they're really doing is they're trying to block out all feelings. I'm not interested in dealing with this. Right? Then what happens? Once the kid decides, you know what, I'm going to tell them how I'm feeling. Right? And the kid starts to say what he's upset about. Right? All of a sudden, the kid starts to cry. Right? The kid starts to cry. You did this to me, you did that to me, I feel bad about this and I feel bad about that. Right? The kid went from, I don't care, and now the kid's crying. Right? Because you broke that shell. The shell the kid is feeling of like, leave me alone, I'm fine, Then the kid went, no, I'm not fine, everything is horrible. And the kid starts crying, right? And then what happens to the kid's done crying? Then the kid feels good, feels happy. Maybe even, if this child, I remember this for sure, having these experiences. First, I'm crying to my parents about how terrible they treat me. And then when I'm done crying about how terrible they treat me, then I feel all this love for them and I give them a big hug, right? So what happened? What happened? How did we go through this? How did we go from, I don't care, leave me alone, to everything's terrible, I can't stand the way you treat me, to I love you, I want to give you a hug and a kiss? How did we do that? Do you know that experience? You know what I'm talking about? So I'm giving you an example of a little child, but it happens to adults also. When Okay, that's an interesting, that's a funny story. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we go from this? It's an interesting story. Anyways, how do we do this? How do we go from leave me alone, I don't care, I'm fine, to no, everything is horrible, and then to I love you, everything is great? See, what happens is like this. If a person blocks out feelings, they can't feel any feelings. Not love, not hate. Not being upset and not being happy. Because the feelings are blocked out. The moment you let feelings in, all of the feelings come back. So even if you start out by bringing in the feeling of, I cannot stand the way you're treating me, because the feelings are now open, give it 2 minutes, and the feelings of, I love you, everything is great, will come right out too. Understand what I'm saying? Because what the child was doing when he was shrugging his shoulders saying, I'm fine, was working very hard to create the shell to hide feelings. The moment that shell is cracked, all the feelings come out. The bad ones and the good ones. Follow? You follow what I'm saying? Make sense? Yeah? So now let's take this to Hashem. This person's feeling, leave me alone, I'm fine, don't bother me. That's like the child shrugging his shoulders. So how do we get the feelings going? What we really want is the good feelings to come at the end of, I love you, Hashem. I want to be one with you. I want to connect to you. I want to do everything for you. That's the feeling you want to come, right? And I want to work hard to be closer to you. But right now, this person is feeling like, I'm fine, leave me alone. So what's the feeling in the middle we need to get? Right? Take the child. Starts off with, leave me alone, I'm fine. And ends with, I love you, everything is amazing. Thank you so much, mommy. I want to give you a hug and a kiss. What's the feeling in the middle? Everything is terrible. Right? Everything's just wrong. It's hard to hide your feelings, right? When it comes to your feelings for Hashem, it's a little bit easier to hide them. It's hard to hide good feelings? Some people have an easier time. You see, it's different extremes. Some people have a very easy time expressing how they feel, even if they're good feelings. And other people have a very hard time. Some people have a very hard time telling people that they love them. Because it's hard for them to share feelings that are inside and try to it's too scary for them to feel all these feelings. It's hard for people, right? So let's go back to this. What are the 3 stages, right? Starts off, leave me alone, I don't care. It ends off with, everything's amazing. What's the feeling in the middle? Everything is terrible. Says the Alter Rebbe, you know how you get from, leave me alone, I'm fine, to everything's great, I want to work, I want to be a great guy? You have to start off with remembering, you have to go in the middle stage, which is, everything is not okay. Things are not okay. And that's what the Alter Rebbe tells this guy to do. This person is feeling like, I'm fine, leave me alone, I have to work hard to serve Hashem, I'm fine. Says the Alter Rebbe, this person has to tell himself, no, you're not fine. Everything is horrible. And if I break down to the point that I really, really feel like everything is horrible, then I can get to the point where, oh my gosh, Hashem, I love you, I wish I can just be connected to you all the time. You understand? Following? So this is what the Alter Rebbe does for 2 chapters, 29 and 30, helps the person get to the point where, no, things are not okay. And then in 31, he tells us, now that you've realized things are not okay, now you can really connect to Hashem with love. Follow? Understand? Okay. So now we understand what the Alter was trying to do. Now let's look at actually 29 and 30 and see how he tells us how we should tell ourselves that things are not okay. And these 2 chapters, 29 and 30, are probably the harshest chapters in the whole Tanya. They're harsh because it's 2 chapters of the Alter telling you, you are not okay. You need to fix up big time, right? But the point of it is not to make you feel bad about yourself. The point of it is to break that feeling of, I'm fine, leave me alone. And then once you break that feeling and you realize, no, things are not okay, then you can get to chapter 31 where you can connect to Hashem with joy. Follow? You follow? So the connecting to Hashem with joy in chapter 31, that we're going to talk about tomorrow, God willing. But today we're going to look at chapter 29 and 30, where the Alter Rebbe tells us how we should tell ourselves things are not okay. You really need to get moving. You really need to fix it up because you are not okay. And the Alter Rebbe was telling this to somebody, even someone who's a Beinoni, which means even someone who's doing every single thing that the Shulchan Aruch says he's doing, every mitzvah, never doing a sin. Him too, says the Alter Rebbe, has to remember, things are not okay. You better get motivated. The Alter Rebbe tells us two things to do that. First 29 and then 30. The first thing he says is like this. The very fact that you say, I'm okay, means you are full of ego. Because your statement starts off with, I'm fine. That is very arrogant. Exactly. So it says the Alter Rebbe, tell yourself how selfish you are. And say, no, you're not okay. You're okay? Look at how arrogant you are. You think you're the biggest guy, best guy in the world. This is what you're supposed to be telling yourself in your head. And if you think you're so amazing, that means you are very far from Hashem. Because Hashem is only if you're not arrogant, right? You follow? That's why I was saying, you're only doing this not because you actually want to feel bad. You're doing it because you're trying to break the feeling of arrogance. And then once you break it, then you can get to the feeling of connection, right? That's why I gave this introduction. So it's not that the Alter wants to make you feel bad about yourself. He wants to motivate you to get out of this feeling that I'm fine, leave me alone. And the way to do that is to break that shell, right? That's what we're explaining, like the kid who goes from everything's fine, leave me alone, to everything is horrible, and then finally gets to everything's amazing, right? So we have to go through that stage of, no, things are not okay. And you better fix yourself up. So the first thing Dr. says is, even if you're doing every single thing right, the very fact that you say, I'm fine, I'm the best guy, I'm okay, that is big time animal soul. That is big time arrogance. And if you have that kind of arrogance, you have a lot of work to do if you want to get close to Hashem. Follow? And the Alter Rebbe says like this, not only is it a proof that you're far from Hashem because you're all arrogant and think you're amazing, if you've ever done a sin in your life, then right there you did something that disconnects you from Hashem, and therefore you got work to do. The Alter Rebbe even says, even if you have dreams that are not holy dreams, and sometimes they're dreams of sin, the opposite of holy, then that means there's some part of you that you got to do real work on. And this is all what the Alter Rebbe is telling us to help us feel that no, things aren't okay. I have to get moving. I can't just sit here and say, I'm fine, I'm good. Things are not fine. You got a lot of work to do if you think you're okay. Follow? The Alter Rebbe doesn't say this here, but I'm adding this. The Gemara says in Yuma that somebody who learns Torah and he merits, we once talked about this, Gemara. Then the Torah is a potion of life, Sam HaChaim. If a person learns Torah and he does not merit, then the Torah is Sam HaMaves, a potion of death. How could the Torah become a potion of death? Even if you're not meriting, how could it become a potion of death? What's the answer? What does life mean? Life is a connection to Hashem. Hashem is the source of all life. So true life is to be connected to Hashem. That's what the pasuk says. V'atem hadvekim b'Hashem, chayim kol chamayim. You are connected to Hashem, and that's why you're all living today. Life is a connection to Hashem. Everything is alive only because it has a connection to Hashem. The question is, what kind of connection? Right? So when a person is arrogant, then this arrogance, like we talked about in previous chapters, is a disconnect from Hashem. So arrogance is a kind of death. Even though the person is technically alive, but he's living in a kind of death-like thing because he's disconnecting from Hashem by being arrogant. Exactly. So I'll give you an example for this. Do you know what a parasite is? A parasite? A parasite is a person has a healthy body, but then he has this unhealthy thing growing in his body. Unhealthy growth in the body. It's a thing, it happens to people. Chas v'sholom. No, it shouldn't happen to anybody. But it happens. It's called a parasite. Just unhealthy tissue just starts growing in the person's body. And it can get bigger and bigger, really damage the person. Right? So this unhealthy tissue, this mass that's just growing in the body, where does it get its life from? How is it alive? from the body. It takes all the healthy life from the body and sucks it up. And what does it turn it into? Unhealthy life of death. Following? And that's what happens to a person who learns Torah with arrogance. He's taking the healthy life of connection to Hashem, and what is he doing? He's feeding his own arrogance with it. And every single time he learns, he says, oh, look at me, I'm smarter now. So instead of taking the Torah and making it into a connection to Hashem, he takes the Torah and makes it into a disconnect from Hashem because he's arrogant and he feels more arrogant every time he learns Torah. Following? And that's what we follow. And that's what the Gemara means when it says that someone who learns Torah doesn't merit. The Torah becomes a potion of death because the Torah itself is making him feel more arrogant. And that's kind of what the Alter Rebbe is telling us in chapter 29. Just because you're doing everything right doesn't mean you're closer to Hashem. And if you're all arrogant about yourself, you got a lot of work to do. And that's the first thing Alter Rebbe tells us to make us feel like things are not okay. I got to get moving. I can't just be the way I am and think everything's fine. No, you're not fine. You're full of yourself and you got to fix that up. Follow? Even dreams, like I mentioned. If I have dreams that are bad, it means there's a part of me that I have to fix up. Clear? That's chapter 29. That's the first thing the Alter Rebbe tells us in order to make us realize that we have to do work. We can't just be complacent. You know what complacent means? Complacent means like, I'm satisfied, I'm good, leave me alone. I come to my minyan, I do my learning, I'm a good guy, leave me alone. Says the Alter Rebbe, no, you got a lot of work to do. You are so full of yourself, you got to fix that up. That's chapter 29. Then in chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe says like this. Here's another thing that you can think about to get rid of that feeling that says, I'm a good guy, I'm fine, leave me alone. He says like this. Compare yourself to all those people who you think you're better than. Compare yourself to them. Okay? Right? The Mishnah says, don't judge a person until what? Don't judge a person unless you come to his place. Right? You know the expression? Put yourself in his shoes. That's what the Mishnah says. Mishnah says, don't judge somebody unless you come to their place. So what's the Mishnah telling you? He says the Alter Rebbe like this. Before you start comparing yourself to be better or worse than somebody else, think about what that person has to go through. Let's say a person who doesn't eat kosher, chas v'shalom. Do you know how much work it would take for that person to stop eating kosher? To start eating kosher and to stop eating not kosher? You know how much work it would take? I never ate not kosher in my life, Baruch Hashem. Thank God I was lucky enough to grow up in a religious family, right? So I never ate not kosher food. So when I walk down the street and I smell the food from some restaurant, whatever, I couldn't care less, right? But somebody who grew up eating not kosher food, imagine what they feel like every time they walk by that restaurant and they remember how good that food was when they used to eat not kosher. You know how hard it is for them to not go into that restaurant? It's very difficult. So do you know how much work they are putting in to serve Hashem? How much work are you putting in to serve Hashem? All the effort that you're expecting that person to do to not eat kosher. Are you putting all that effort into your prayer? Are you putting all that effort into your learning? And if you're not, stop thinking that you're much better than them. Understand? Even someone who actually does sin, someone who does eat chas v'shalom not kosher food, but you think you're better than because you only eat kosher. Really? How much effort would it take that person to not eat kosher? Now you take that effort and you put it into your learning. Let's see you take all that effort and put it into your learning, put it into your prayer, put it into your mitzvahs. You're expecting somebody else to put all that effort. Where's your effort? Following? Here's another thing the Alter Rebbe tells us to remind us that, oh, you got work to do. Don't think you're just fine and dandy. No. You got work. Look at everybody else in this world. You're lucky you grew up in a religious family. You're in a Jewish school. Your environment is a good, healthy environment. So you don't have to work so hard to do your Torah and mitzvahs. Great. That doesn't make you any better than anybody else. You didn't put any effort to get to what you have. Let's see you fight. Let's see you work. Then start talking. Work hard on yourself. When you're sitting on the couch and you think you're a good guy, get off the couch and go learn something. That's how much effort it takes him to stop eating, to not go to that restaurant. The effort for him not to go to a restaurant, you take that and put it into your learning. You take that and put it into your prayer before you start thinking you're better than somebody else. Follow? The truth is that even someone who, hangs out in these places because his business takes him to all kinds of places in the world and it's very hard for him and he gets all the temptations because he's traveling all over and he's meeting people and it's hard for him not to eat kosher. The truth is that Hashem expects him to fight and to control himself. Hashem expects him to not eat that not kosher food. And that's his business with Hashem. But as far as you're concerned, don't start judging him and thinking you're better than him. Not the way it works. Think about his position. Think about how much effort it takes for him to be what he is, and see if you're putting in that kind of effort to your service of Hashem. Follow? Clear? You want to ask something? Is it clear? So these are the two things out there it tells us in chapter 29 and 30 to think about when we still feel complacent. We feel like we did enough. We feel like we're okay. And we need to... Complacent? Yeah, so complacent comes from satisfaction, but it really comes from the arrogance of the animal soul. The arrogance of the animal soul always says, I'm good, leave me, check me out. Right? And I got to break that and say, no, you're not okay. You got work to do. And once you feel broken about your situation, like that child who says, no, everything's terrible, then tomorrow when we get to chapter 31, we can get to the next stage where you feel like, okay, things weren't okay, but now I can fix it. And now I'm going to be super happy because I can serve Hashem. And that we're going to talk about in chapter 31 when we get to it tomorrow. Clear? Okay.